Hello, everyone, and welcome to the people who are watching online and here in New York City, present at the AFS International Office with us. And this is going to be the third, second session actually for the day 3 of International Youth Conference. And as you know that past week at the UN headquarters during the UN General Assembly, we were having the Transforming Education Summit. And this month and this year have been really significant because of the topics of education and realization that we need to talk about education and we need to do about something on that. So we've been having a lot of conversation on education. On day 1, we had a conversation yesterday. We had a nice presentation by Zoya on early age education, which was well received. And now we're going to have this conversation that I think is really important. That's the equitable access to education, and which we think was not discussed at the Transforming Education Summit. And we should have been discussed, and I think it is a real issue. If you talk about equitable education, it's a big, broad topic. It's a huge topic, and to talk on that, we have people with us, experts and civil society activists, and from academia joining us. I have Mr. Javeed Mirza with us, who runs an organization who totally works with the education and actually the equitable education with kids in South Asia. And he's a PhD scholar himself. He will tell about his work more to you. And we have Emily with us, who is also like working with the education of women, especially in the areas like Afghanistan and other places where the conflict is going on. And then we have Zoya with us, who's joining us from Albany live. But she's the president of the United Nations Association of Columbia University. So we're gonna start the conversation with the introductory remarks and a few words about yourself, and then we will follow with the question and answers. So I'll give you the floor first to give a brief introduction about you and your words on the session.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate the honor that you are giving me by allowing me to address the youth. You know, the youth is, they say, the future. I do believe that the youth have huge potential for bringing societal change. You know, the only thing is the youth need to have a vision which allows them to work along progressive lines. You know, if you have that with your boundless energy and with your possibility of getting away from the dogma and the old style thinking, we are on the verge of getting into a new path here. And I congratulate IYC for taking this initiative and rallying the international youth on one stage. We are here with you, and anything we can do, that would be great. On the issue about educational access to education, equitable access to education. This is a prime issue when dealing with education. When we say access, we realize that not every student is able to join school. And there are many reasons for this. One reason is because parents are poor and they have no money to afford the fees. Other reasons are, like parents want the children to work with them to augment their income, and for the girls to be at home and give a helping hand to the mother. These are other issues here, but these are not insurmountable issues. These issues have been tackled, in the case of the issue about, parents not being able to send children to school because of lack of income. The government in Brazil has come out of the way where they are, giving stipend to the parents and, enforcing some rules here which must send the children to school, and the children are also helped that way here. But then access is also denied because there are no facilities in schools. Facilities like, girls' bathroom, facilities like in a good classroom. I have seen so many classrooms which are, under the sun. And when the rain comes, there is no place for them to go. People sit on the floor here. So these are other issues here. Transportation. Schools are not in the neighborhood. It is probably necessary to have, a bus or some other conveyance which will allow them to go. So, these are handicaps. These are not, exact issues there that cannot be solved here. But the more important aspect of access to education is the quality of education. There is a increase in literacy. There is a growing of education, which is positive. Except for the pandemic, things have been going forward. But the nature of the quality of education, that has been missing. When I say quality, it basically means, children should be able to think it out on their own. Children should not go into this old mode that has always been practiced about what is called, rote memorization. Rote memorization is an old methodology. So quality education can be replaced that by, critical thinking methodology, a pedagogy that we are pursuing called discourse-oriented pedagogy. So quality of education is also fostered when you are able to take this en masse by incorporating technology. Today we have got technology tools, globally, which enable us to do that. So what we at NEIEA, which is the new Equitable and Innovative Educational Association, have done is to come up with a paradigm, which allows a combination of technology and pedagogy to make this thing happen. Primarily what we are doing is we are saying, technology as conceived that we are using should all be put in a place called the lead center. This is the hub. This is where we have got specialists, teaching specialists in all subjects. This is where we have got the pedagogists and we have got mentor teachers. So they all, bring about the lesson planning. They bring about the materials for the lesson. And then we connect to all these centers here, like, public schools, low-cost, low-performing schools, and, all those segments which are not attended to, like, out-of-school children, girls' education, mothers' education. All these lack good quality education. So we connect from the lead center directly with the recipient centers. So this way we establish quality in education. And then we develop teacher training. And to do that, we have the mentor teachers again giving, specialized training to teachers, giving the materials. So this is a hybrid approach. The hybrid approach to which combines online learning as well as on-site learning. So this is our approach here to bringing about, a high quality equitability in education.
Thank you so much, Mr. Javeed. And you raised a really good point about the quality education, and I think that's missing. And when we talk about Global South, there are jobs, but there are no people to do the jobs because they don't have the quality skills or the skills that are required to do those jobs. And so we really need to work on that, especially in Global South. We'll talk more about this. And now next, I would like to give Emily floor to you to introduce yourself and some introductory remarks.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Emily Van Vleck, and I am with the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs, or NFBPWC for short. Ali had mentioned briefly earlier that we started working with the displaced Afghan families that were arriving in the U.S. We are a business and professional women's organization. So our goal was to help the women get back to their careers that they had left behind in Afghanistan. Out of this, we worked with a young woman named Zohal, who, after the passing of the Taliban rule that girls over the age of 12 could no longer attend school, she was really upset by that and started her own initiative to put pressure on the government and, various other governments to allow girls in Afghanistan to go back to school. And, talking about the Transforming Education Summit, the irony was not lost on me that it happened to fall on the year anniversary of the Taliban decision to not let girls attend school any longer. So speaking of equitable access to education, right there is a glaring issue that was briefly mentioned at the Transforming Education Summit, but certainly not enough in detail. So, so Hall's Let Us Learn campaign is active, and we welcome anybody that would care to support it. And then going off of Javeed's points, who raised excellent points on equitable access to education, and then issues within education, which I think also weren't really discussed enough at the Transforming Education Summit. As you mentioned, Javeed, there's these tried and true methods that are continuing, and this is the curriculum that's put forward, but that may not be fostering these, may not be designing adults, giving them the skills that they need to move forward to be global citizens, to work on addressing the SDGs and having a sustainable future, being instilled with skills that they need to go out into the workforce. And, Ellie, to your point about the jobs not being available, children, even if they're accessing school in their home countries, may not have the jobs needed, there to foster that learning and to match with the skills that they may or may not have learned in school. So, the brain drain is such a huge issue too. Yeah. So, the issue of education, we could talk all day about it, and, equitable access to education, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for the work both of you are doing. That's really important for the society, and especially bringing those communities who have lost a lot of stuff because of war and some sort of disaster, either they're climate disasters or natural disasters or the wars that are going on, and bringing them back to the track. Education is the key. That's, I think, where we should start from, and that's exactly what you're doing. With that, I would like to give the floor to Zoya to give a brief introduction about herself, and then our remarks on the topic.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice being here again today after yesterday's session on early childhood education. And I think we talked about some topics similarly, and some things that, even Mr. Javeed has mentioned. I speak from my experience of working in education development in Pakistan. And I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of equitable access to education over there is the large income divide that we have in the country, and that divides the kind of access to the quality of education that you receive. And there's a huge gap between private schools, which serve at least like 3% of the population that is really privileged, versus 97% of the population that goes to public schools. And in terms of the quality of education, the pedagogy that they use, the kind of books that they have, tend to be more traditional, tend to not be up to par with what the world is studying right now. Like we talked about yesterday, 21st century skills, or talking about, diversity, and more innovative thinking, creativity in the way that we deal with the world around us. I think those topics are lost or not really being taught in those schools. And then with that being said, I think a third big factor in education access is that we have madrasas, or Islamic religious institutions, in the country as well, that serve a population that cannot afford to go to school. But religious education is always free. You can always go to your mosque around the corner. And while one cannot counter the fact that religious education may be important for some people, the kind of, again, education quality that they are receiving is not universal education. It's specifically aligned to religious values, or in some areas where religious centers are not regulated, they tend to be more conservative, which is a separate political topic, of course. But that is also a breeding problem in areas where there isn't access to education properly, that you have now religious institutions, or people steer more towards this religious safe haven instead of going to the schools that children should be going to. At the same time, again, with income being such a big challenge and the access to going to schools, I think one of the bigger problems also on the government end is that we don't have enough schools. With a population so large, you need to have more amount of schools, so that physical existence of a school building to serve the population is not there. There are not enough of them, and so that might not be as much of an income problem, but an access problem, that there isn't enough in the area that people want to go to. And in terms of that, there are a lot of local NGOs that have started up that are serving remote areas, rural and semi-urban populations. But something that I said again yesterday was that NGOs are a bandage to what the government should be doing. That it's great work, it's great research that NGOs do. There's new ideas that come with the youth-led NGOs especially, and that's something that can be advised to the government on what changes that they can make. But at the same time, it's the responsibility of the national budget to be creating those schools and providing access to education. So there's a lot of different challenges in different scopes, but I think these are the few big problems that at least I can speak from in experience in Pakistan.
Thank you, Zoya, and everyone for the remarks. And I'm trying to get the questions from the people online who are writing in comments. And there are more other comments rather than questions.
I can comment on your point.
Sure, please.
You raised a very valid question, the question about skills development.
Yes.
This is a core issue for the youth, because skills development is also the way in which they build up confidence, they empower themselves, and they put themselves on a trajectory of hope and progress rather than, flounder, backwards here. But again, for skills development, you need to have good foundational learning. When a person goes to join a technical institute or goes to a factory to work, they must be able to look at the drawings, or they should be able to understand basic aspects of what learning is. So without the precondition of having foundational learning, skill development is not going to happen. So first we should ensure that, and then there has to be a holistic arrangement between the industry and the educational and the technical centers. If they are both not working in concurrence with each other, then that skills is lost. We always get new skills in the market, and there is automation happening. So with that, there is always a disruption in the old style of skills training here. So that has to be overcome by having this direct congruence between the market and the need for the skills, and then the whole educational bureaucracy, which sort of streamlines the two. So if you have that, then definitely it's going to be a plus.
Well, let's see how it goes in future. It's totally depend. We call ourselves a part of larger system of civil society, and then there comes the international organizations, and then the governments who we really push. But then we also have a part to play in this, and we really hope that we together can do something in this. There's a very interesting question posted by people, someone who's watching online, and the question is, education is a power. How about people with the disability to access to education in the zone of conflict? So both disability and the conflict zone, and then access of education to them. I'll start with you.
The zones, conflict zones, they have really been increasing over a period of the last few decades here, and you see that through the high exodus of refugees happening. So we have got issues about zonal conflicts and then again education here for them, accessibility for them. I'm glad that the UN is taking some steps for that. I've heard about how education is being run in refugee camps, but I think that's a very small aspect of it. However, technology will enable this. I would, if I was in the UNESCO, if I was in the UNICEF, I would say that let's run technology centers from central place and then connect to every refugee camp. Have a classroom here where the students can access education right from this place here. The way we have our conception of having a lead center, the same thing can be happening here. So this will definitely take care about education. Technology is a key changer for this, and if we are not able to avail that, then we are losing a great opportunity for that. We cannot stop conflicts, but conflicts will go on, but education should not go on. Ultimately, conflicts only can be stopped when people become educated and they realize that it is not the politicians which have run the country, but it is sane people with humane values upholding it.
Emily.
I think, that is such a huge question, and it's upsetting that it has to be asked. It's upsetting that there are so many zones of conflict and that they do just seem to keep growing. I think, there are steps being taken, but to your point with, technology, Javeed, technology, the Wi-Fi services is such a huge issue. I grew up in a lower income household and I did not always have Wi-Fi, so in zones of conflict, refugee camps, how do we get that accessibility to these students so that they continue learning? It's, that's such an issue in itself. And sometimes, it's almost as if the technology and the advances we've made are creating more inaccessibility and more inequity, to accessing education. So, having books and, paper that children can physically learn with in these zones of conflict, I think is, sometimes the better answer. So it's a huge issue, and I don't think there is one right answer, but it is definitely, I think, another thing that's missing from a lot of these conversations, unfortunately.
We'll talk about this more in the conversation. A few questions in mind. Zoya, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, I think like we spoke about what Ali made.
I think we need to.
Yeah, because it echoes every time I speak. No, I think the conversation around technology is so important because that's another issue, especially even with COVID, when people switch to this remote learning platforms, a lot of areas in Pakistan and around the world as well that were developing rural areas or villages, they don't have access to Wi-Fi. So having tablets or any sort of, ed tech platforms, while it's a great, shift that we're having into technology and tech learning, they're kind of, futile attempts for those areas. And a lot of times, even as a student, when we're discussing, technology and using tech to access these areas for education, my question to my professors is the same, where I'm like, what's the point of, making all of these apps or doing this, ed tech platforms when there's no Wi-Fi or there's no technology in those areas? So how do we get to them? And in, like you said before, that sometimes just having, normal paper and books is a better way to get to them, and something that my organization, the Citizen Foundation in Pakistan, did during COVID was we had like magazines, which were like kind of thick magazines with like weekly activities made on them. So there was like fun activities, there was like little comics and some reading and learning, like literacy, numeracy, depending on the grade level. And they were sent or to the school, or this, you could also have like a local community center where you can then disperse them to those households that can come and pick it up from the school, and or something, like figure out the way you get it to them. But those magazines, or like different sort of workbooks, could be another way in to get education to their doorstep, at least where Wi-Fi is not able to reach them. And it could be tried out, I guess, in refugee areas also, or refugee camps where there are weekly disbursements of these magazines or books, and rural materials, like again, like yesterday we talked about play-based learning. So I guess like guided play books that can help them at least learn, or at least like exercise their brains, so that they're a little away from like the conflict that's going on around them, and have some sort of normalcy in their lives. Ali, I can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Oops. Well, we have to learn to live with new technologies. And next, I have to.
Speaking about technologies, let me just highlight this here. Technologies, I can really say is that, the other day I was watching, Elon Musk say that he will provide Starlink to Iran, where there are protests going on. So technology like this exists. He can provide technology on his own to have internet connectivity across the country. And this doesn't exist only one country. Such possibilities do exist. MOOC technology allows, example, edX does it, and Coursera, so many other companies here, they are connecting globally. So we can link all the refugee camps around the world through this MOOC technology, the massive openware online courses here. So this is no brainchild here. This has already been established 10 years back. So we got many other accesses. I know of a guy called Ed from New York who has this product called Racial, which allows learning without internet provision.
Nice.
So technologies do exist. It is the political will of the masters in this country here which will enable this. We are speaking about special education. Why is special education not given a priority? Because it needs more one-to-one relationship. It needs counseling. So there is more resources required for that. Are we willing to give those resources? If we are, then every possibility exists.
I agree. So, something from related, this question is on the screen right now. I've put this question on the screen from Lena. And this is a really interesting comment, and then we can further talk about it. And she says that conflict zone or not, I think a lot need to be done to cater to the learners with disability. I went to school with a blind student, and there was no material to cater to his needs. We had to assist him with needs so he can translate them to the Braille and be able to learn. I think we also need to abolish this separate education, special education thing, and mixed learners where we can make possible and ensure that every child's needs are looked after regardless of their status. Do you think it's possible that we can abolish the system where we have the schools for special education, like first say she just mentioned about a blind student, and do you think it is practically possible to do this?
I am not an educator, so I couldn't speak to the practicality of that. But I think it would be it would help us take strides to destigmatize people with disabilities. And I think a lot of times there's this notion that people with disabilities aren't able to do X, Y, Z. They can't lead a normal life. I know especially here in this country, there is a big stigma around people with disabilities. So I think breaking down that boundary of, you're over here in your own special class where everyone else is over here, I think that would be monumental for helping to destigmatize disabilities and give people with disabilities, a more equitable access to life. But Javeed, I think, could probably better speak to the...
Yeah, I think special education is a plus. It is not a minus. We need to have special education for special, deficit learners here. whether it is students from autism background, whether it is people with emotional problems, whether it is people who are blinded, or, these things exist in life. There is nothing wrong in that. And the only issue is, how are we going to help such people with special problems, or, nurture them and consider them as equally capable human beings with something special to contribute. So once we hold that value that these are, good people and they are lovable, they need to be given every opportunity like everybody else, then we should put them on a pedestal and help them learn. Special education is one way out. But then the point that she's mentioning about collaborating with everybody else, that is fine too. Once we elevate them, then we should help them connect. Now we are global students. Education is not confined to one place. Nurturing global connectivity with special education children and everybody else will definitely enhance their level of learning there.
Zoya, do you want to comment on that? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, yes. I think, yeah, with special access to education, I think, like mentioned, there needs to be more awareness in one way, and to not make it awkward for that child in that classroom. Also, I think teachers need to make a conscious effort to make them feel comfortable and part of the classroom. At the same time, cater the pedagogy or cater the curriculum to them. So a lot of times, like, the classroom is studying one thing, and it might be, for different reasons. So with it, there could be physical disability, there could be, different learning abilities that children have, and there is one entire conversation on how children learn themselves, right? So there's different learning spectrums on which children, some are visual learners and some like writing, or some like playing, and some like drawing. Like for myself, I can say that I need to write everything down. If I'm just sitting in the classroom and I'm just receiving information, sometimes it just doesn't go in my head. Sometimes I need to write it down. That's the way I learn. And actively, teacher training should cater to the fact that teachers should learn that every child learns in a different way. Now, coming to the fact that children have different learning abilities, or learning or special abilities, then there should be more resources, like in terms of like physical resources, like classroom wheelchairs, or having a ramp in a school, or having a special ed teacher, or they're called teacher assistants, that can provide one-on-one help to children. So dedicating actual resources in a school also is an important, and then looking at curriculum changes that are more easy for that child to grasp according to their learning ability is also important.
Thank you, Zoya, for this. Is there anyone in the room want to ask any question? Yes, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, I'm from Sudan. Just following up on the discussion earlier about access to education in conflict areas in general, and for example, accessibility, user internet, and etc. I think we're talking here about education at a global and international level, and I think sometimes because maybe most of the people say there is a diversity when it comes to the economic status of different countries across the globe. I think sometimes we forget how the gap can be huge between different countries. Like for example, we were talking about access to internet, and for example, some children didn't have access to electricity to begin with, and there's also the barriers that link to gender, for example, and the barriers of the concept of why a girl should have an education to begin with, and or a school is just so far away to access this, so it's just more convenient to just stay at your place, and why should you learn? So I think my question is, what are the efforts that's being made to actually make sure that these inequalities and these different gaps between different countries are actually topics that people are still fighting for, and that we don't subconsciously move to a more convenient solutions. Yeah, I know it's a big question. It's trying to fix the huge issues around the globe, but how can we make sure that these issues that might be way to, like, most countries moved way, like 100 steps ahead of it, are still being pushed for example, and to have like more resources pushed towards that direction. Yeah.
I think that is it. You're absolutely right. You know, education is not a one size fits all thing, especially, you know, when you consider the economic differences of countries. I think, you know, the Transforming Education Summit again was a step in the right direction to combat, you know, these vast divides between countries. That, you know, coming up with ideas that fit for everyone and sharing best practices, how to address these things with limited resources, I think is definitely a right step, a step in the right direction. So we'll see what happens, what comes out of that, and hopefully, you know, more conferences of that kind will as education is, you know, taking more of a center stage, we can start having those conversations. I'll again allow my panelists chance.
Sure. I think you have addressed a very important question here: why countries are so divergent in educational, growth. Countries like Sudan, or countries from the south, basically. One important reason is because they have not prioritized education. They have not allocated enough of their GDP for educational growth. If you see the Western European countries here, they normally give around 7 to 10% of their whole budget, of their whole GDP for education. But in the country, like say, example, India that I come from, the allocation of GDP for education is only 3%. And I know the same thing is in Pakistan and so many other countries around the world. So this lack of prioritization, lack of allocation of funds, that is one big reason for that. Besides that, there are other issues like corruption. Whatever money is allocated is eaten away in different ways here. So that is another aspect here. But the positive aspect is that, we have got global organizations like UNICEF, UNESCO. I know that UNICEF had sponsored a plan which was carried out in Kenya, where 300,000 out-of-school children were able to go to school here. So the universalization of approaches that is there through these huge organizations like UNESCO, that should be utilized by all these underdeveloped countries here. So that's a big plus that they can avail. So if you can build up such more structures, and we have got philanthropies around the world, which are also committed to global education, then we can definitely, overcome that. But this has to be number one, people's pressure on the governments here to allocate more resources and for the proper utilization of those resources.
And I think, sorry, I just want to comment on one of your points you made, that education is so dependent on other industries and other infrastructure in place. The young lady that asked the question mentioned, gender norms. That is a societal thing that you can't address through, it can be addressed through education, but you can't stick money to that. You can't put funding towards that and then solve that problem, or, access to school through, roads or transportation. That is another thing that it relates to education, but that's a separate budget issue that, you're looking at. So education is reliant on so many different sectors and factors that it's very difficult to fight it,
I understand it is. Zoya, do you want to answer this question?
I think in all the answers, I forgot what the question is. So if you can repeat all the question once.
You want to repeat your question in a louder voice? You couldn't.
You can just summarize it, or it's just basically how different countries have different needs, and generally the global community moves to a more advanced solutions without keeping in mind that there are so multi-layered barriers to education, like just mentioned, and how, for example, there are the gender inequality, there are the economic barriers, and how the global community is not even including those activists, the youth activists, for example, working in similar countries who are trying to like solve it from a different angle into the discussion. Most of the solutions are more of like, we want to, yeah, I don't know. I think that's something else.
Yes, I think one of the panelists that answered, I think Javeed did that. One of the biggest barriers I think is again like corruption in the government, and a lot of the reasons why developing countries are developing countries is because of corruption and the fact that governments don't take responsibility for what they should be taking responsibility for, and that's one area of resources that should be when there's an education budget, like again, like talking from Pakistan, like 80% of the national budget goes to defense and the military, while 20% is allocated to education. And I think the education divide, even in the United States, as much as I've studied, is as large as that, where teachers aren't being paid enough, and there's not enough funds that are allocated towards public schools. And we've seen the state of public schools in areas that are lesser privileged or lower income communities, even in America, or even in New York. If you go into neighborhoods that are on the lower end of the tax bracket, the quality of education, the quality of the infrastructure of those schools is significantly worse than the quality of a better public school in a better area, in a richer town, for example. And so that divide, like we said, like that equitable access and changes in different countries according to at least the income bracket or the tax bracket, but depending on how much like the government allocates their budget to it. So that's one responsibility of the government. I think the global community does do a lot, in my opinion, and I think like we have these organizations like UNICEF, UNESCO, and then there are other development agencies such as the USAID, or you have other DFID, or now it's FCDO. All of these different organizations, they do provide funds for projects. So if they provide grants to other smaller NGOs that are working in those areas, and in terms of that, they are giving resources. More conferences or more conversations around such can help share ideas. Like you said, that there are different people around the world are countering these challenges in different ways. They're thinking about them innovatively, and it's important to learn from how someone in Uganda might be solving for an education gender problem, and someone from Pakistan can probably take on from that idea. So conversations as such, or mutual platforms where people can come together, are one way to share ideas. But then, yeah, again, like reallocating resources on a policy level for whom there is a responsibility to do so is the first and foremost point of intervention.
Thank you so much, Zoya, for this. And we're moving towards the end of this conversation. But last question from you, Abigail.
Yes, so I think there's a very big gap between private sector and public sector education in developing countries. I'm from the Gambia, and my sisters, they're lucky enough to go to a very good private school. But there's a very big gap because there are a lot of kids who are from unfortunate socioeconomic backgrounds, and they can't attend these schools, which only feeds into inequality, which is never good for any economy. And I think there's potential for governments to engage with schools in the private sector, and there's also definitely room for intergovernmental organizations to promote this cooperation. But I want to ask you guys, are you aware of any methods that might be beneficial to bridge this gap between the public sector and private sector education?
I think you would be the right person to answer this one.
Elite education or private school education for the upper class has always been there. This big dichotomy between classes has existed forever. What we have to do is to bridge that gap. And towards bridging the gap, there has to be allocation of more funding for the public schools. There has to be elevation of quality of learning for the public school so that it becomes on par with the private schools. So in the example, in New York City, there is a public school system here. There are elements in public school system here which are good, and there are also which are not so good. But on the whole, public school system here is still so much better than even private sector here. But this doesn't exist in many third world countries here. So that gap can be bridged. What we are doing from our organization is to bridge the gap by using technology. Technology is a big enabler. By having a MOOC technology, we can conduct millions of children's education through some specialized centers here. So that needs a lot of political support. That needs global support. But there is this possibility that exists. There is an organization called Hujiang in China, which is teaching 100 million children. That is concocted in a private sector manner, but that possibility opens it up. So if we are able to build that people's pressure here for building quality education for the public, where all people attend, public schools here, then that is definitely a possibility that exists.
Thank you so much for this answer. And we're moving towards the end of the conversation. And we can continue this conversation offline soon after when we end this, and then there will be just online sessions for an hour, so we can have more offline conversation with the people here. Javeed is here, Emily is here, I'm here, and we can join. And any concluding remarks, Zoya, from you?
I wanted to add one more thing on how to bridge the gap. So it was a sort of an experiment that started after COVID in Pakistan, where the previous government, so not the current government, but the previous government of Imran Khan came up with a single national curriculum. So in that, what the idea was that there was one curriculum. Usually there's a national curriculum that has learning objectives that each school is free to achieve in their own methodology or their own pedagogy. And so that's the reason there's a divide between the private schools and the public schools, because the way the resources that they have are different. So in this, and one big difference in Pakistan is there's a huge divide between private school in terms of that it's the medium of instruction is in English, while public schools, the medium instruction is Urdu. So, which is the national language. Now, the divide between the two languages is highly politicized. So, anybody who speaks English is considered to be very knowledgeable and, definitely privileged, or someone who's way smarter, as opposed to someone who speaks in Urdu or has education in Urdu. And we know, of course, that the language in which you receive education has nothing to do with your intelligence or your capacity to grow or to achieve anything in life. However, it's a stigma, right? Because of a post-colonial state, there's this idea of speaking in English is obviously definitely better. And in order to bridge that kind of gap, what they did was they changed the language or the medium of instruction to Urdu, which is the regional or national language within all schools. And the sort of justification was that if everybody is speaking in the same language, then there is going to be no divide between this like English speaking class and then the Urdu speaking class. And at the same time, there's also justification then this is also a separate language, that your mother tongue based education, or the language in which which is your regional or your ethnic language, allows you to receive information and learn at a higher capacity than a foreign language, which in the case of Pakistan, English is a foreign language. So that's how it was justified. However, it was a bad timing because it started right after COVID, where there were already significant learning gaps, and it got stopped midway because the government changed and then they stopped the implementation of this plan. But that could be one way to, I guess, experiment or see whether that reduces this divide between the public and private school education. It's an idea, it's still not being tested and evaluated properly, but it would be interesting to see if other governments or other countries have done such, such similar programs, and whether that has been able to reduce this inequality or inequity in access to education. But anyway, that's one point. It was great being here on the panel, even if I was online, and the questions have definitely been very interesting. And the panelists, thank you so much. I've learned from your thoughts as well. So yeah, looking forward to having more similar conversations.
Thank you, Zoya, for joining us. Any final concluding remarks?
So I want to just thank you for having me here today. It's been such an engaging conversation, and the questions that were asked were so huge and difficult questions, but it's really inspiring to hear, because it shows that, you know, youth are focused on this. We're watching the leaders of the world, and we want to know what's being done and how these issues are being solved. So it's refreshing to hear. I think, that youth engagement on these topics are so key, because we're living through it. We're seeing where the gaps are and asking, demanding them to be fixed. My last concluding remark before we wrap up today is, let's not forget the millions of girls in Afghanistan that currently do not have access to education because of their gender. Their basic human right is being denied because of their gender. And please do not leave them out of your thoughts. And let's keep fighting to make sure that they once again are able to learn. Thank you.
Your concluding remarks.
Yeah. I'd like to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity. I think you people are making a dent in whatever has been conceived so far by the elders, which is the creation of a huge mess. The pandemic was one example of that mess created by these, leaders, bureaucrats, politicians, scientists, all of them conniving for their own selfish vested interests. The youth must be able to disrupt this, the way in which this has been developed here. So it is for the youth to understand that, there are people with good interests and there are people with bad interests. And we must identify who are the wrong ones here to pursue. Let us bring out values where we adore and support people of good motivation, and also, go against and oppose those people with machinations, with manipulations. And whether, it doesn't matter if they are the president of the country, or they are the, whosoever they are there, or they are the big CEO of a company here. If we are not able to stand up to these people who are bent upon destruction, which is what we are right now, we are not going to achieve anything. And for this, we have to be ourselves, honest, upright. We have to be ethical in our own living here. If we have this and we have human values, we will be going far. And I look forward to the youth to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone online for this session, and everyone over here, and especially thanking the speakers. And with that, we're gonna right away move towards our online session that is on the AFS Youth Assembly, that will be moderated by Ms. Yumna Khan, and you can do the transactions. Thank you once again.